Parnas papers released by the House Intelligence Committee provide explosive and disturbing new details about the president's scheme to extort Ukraine for political gain. The trove of materials were seized in October from Lev Parnas, Rudy Giuliani's point man. There he is with Rudy for Ukraine. And 500 more pages were released just tonight. Among the documents is a letter Giuliani wrote to request a meeting with Ukrainian President-elect Zelensky, a request he said he made with Trump's knowledge and consent. Those are his words in the letter. It's evidence that the president personally approved Giuliani's adventures in Ukraine, something Trump later tried to deny. In fact, he denied. Now Parnas is breaking his silence in an exclusive interview with our MSNBC colleague, Rachel Maddow, that airs tonight at 9. You got to watch this thing. He says that President Trump knew exactly what he was doing in this whole affair.
What do you think is the main inaccuracy or the main lie that's being told that you feel like you can correct?
That the president didn't know what was going on. President Trump knew exactly what was going on. He was aware of all of my movements. I wouldn't do anything without the consent of Rudy Giuliani or the president. I have no intent, I have no reason to speak to any of these officials. I mean, they have no reason to speak to me. Why would President Zelensky's inner circle or the Minister Avakov or all these people or President Poroshenko meet with me? Who am I? They were told to meet with me, and that's the secret that they're trying to keep. I was on the ground doing their work.
In terms of the president and what he has said about you, he said about you and Mr. Fruman, Igor Fruman, I don't know those gentlemen, I don't know about them, I don't know what they do. You're saying that was not a true statement from the president?
He lied.
What? Well, she got to the heart of this question.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.